Hello, sixth grade, and welcome to your history textbook. We're going to be jumping into chapter 3, and we're going to begin with our chapter opener. Now, the nice thing is, if you want to access your curriculum online, you can actually play it and listen to the information if some of the vocabulary being used is difficult or you're not sure how to pronounce certain words. Let's go ahead and listen to our chapter opener together, and then we'll get into the lesson.
The story matters. Was Eastern Africa the home of the earliest humans? Many scientists believe that is where the first group of human-like beings lived. Some early human skeletons found in Africa are over 6 million years old. Scientists estimate that this skull may be more than 3.2 million years old. It may have belonged to a 3-year-old child who lived in Eastern Africa. Fossils like this one tell us a lot about early humans. Some early people may have begun moving from Africa to other regions about 1.8 million years ago. Over a period of time, humans were found in Europe and as far away as China. Everywhere early humans went, they left behind clues about their lives. By studying these clues, scientists can tell us about our past. Lesson 1. Hunter-gatherers. It matters because technology led to the expansion and survival of early civilization. The Paleolithic Age. Guiding question. What was life like during the Paleolithic Age? Historians call the early period of human history the Stone Age. They do this because it was the time when people used stone to make tools and weapons. The earliest part of this period was the Paleolithic Age. In Greek, Paleolithic means old stone. Therefore, the Paleolithic Age is also called the Old Stone Age. The Paleolithic Age began about 2.5 million years ago and lasted until around 8000 BC. Remember, that is about 4,500 years earlier than recorded time, which starts about 5,500 years ago.
So let's take a minute and review what we listened to so far. So the earliest period of history is referred to as the Paleolithic Age, and another name for this is the Stone Age. Now, this is something that's very important, and it's going to come up in your questions for your lesson review on page 61. So when you go to answer your questions, this is going to reference this piece of information is a reference for one of your questions that you're going to be answering. Now, we know the word Paleolithic comes from the Greek word meaning old stone. So another name for the Paleolithic Age is the Old Stone Age. Let's go ahead and continue listening.
Surviving in the Paleolithic Age. Try to imagine what life was like during the Paleolithic Age. Think about living in a time long before any roads, farms, or villages existed. Paleolithic people often moved around in search of food. They were nomads, or people who regularly moved from place to survive. They traveled in groups or bands of about 20 or 30 members. Paleolithic people survived by hunting and gathering. The search for food was their main activity, and it was often difficult. They had to learn which animals to hunt and which plants to eat. Paleolithic people hunted buffalo, bison, wild goats, reindeer, and other animals, depending on where they lived. Along coastal areas, they fished. These early people also gathered wild nuts, berries, fruits, wild grains, and green plants. Finding food. Paleolithic men and women performed different tasks within the group. Men, not women, hunted large animals. They often had to search far from their camp. Men had to learn how animals behaved and how to hunt them. They had to develop tracking methods. At first, men used clubs or drove the animals off cliffs to kill them. Over time, however, Paleolithic people developed tools and weapons to help them hunt. The traps and spears they made increased their chances of killing their prey.
So here, one of our questions that we're going to focus on is why did people live together in groups? What was the benefit of them living together in a group? Now, if we go back to our reading and use our text evidence, we can see that each person had different tasks. So the men were in charge of hunting, the women were in charge of gathering, and they would gather plants and different kinds of things to eat. The men would hunt buffalo, bison, goats, and other animals, depending on where they lived. If they lived by the coast, they would fish. They would gather things like nuts and berries and grains. So it's easier for them to live in a group and have everybody participate in gathering these things that they need to survive to make sure there's enough for everybody. Now, the Paleolithic age was made up of people who are referred to as nomads. So nomads were people who were used to moving from place to place. They never really stayed in one place long term, and they were made of about 20 to 30 members. Here you can see an illustration of what historians think they looked like. Let's go ahead on to our next page. Now, if you're following along in your textbook, the opener was on page 51. The lesson began on page 54. So we are working on page 54 and now on 55.
Women stayed close to the camp, which was often located near a stream or other body of water. They looked after the children and searched nearby woods and meadows for berries, nuts, and grains. Everyone worked to find food because it was the key to the group's survival. Some scientists believe that an equal relationship existed between Paleolithic men and women. It is likely that both made decisions that affected the band or group. Some evidence suggests that some men and women may have hunted in monogamous pairs. This means that a man and a woman worked together to find food for themselves and their children. Such groupings became the first families. The invention of tools. Culture is the way of life for a group of people who share similar beliefs and customs. The methods Paleolithic people used to hunt and gather their food were part of their culture, as were the tools they used. Technology, tools and methods to perform tasks, was first used by Paleolithic people. Before this time, sticks, stones, and tree branches served as tools. Later, people made devices from a hard stone called flint. Have you ever imagined how difficult it would be to prepare or eat food without a cutting tool? Paleolithic people learned that by hitting flint with another hard stone, the flint would flake into pieces. These pieces had very sharp edges that could be used for cutting. Hand axes, for example, were large pieces of flint tied to wooden poles. Flint technology was a major breakthrough for early peoples. Over time, early people made better, more complex tools. Spears and bows and arrows made killing large animals easier. Harpoons, or spears with sharp points, and fishhooks increased the number of fish caught. Early humans used sharp-edged tools to cut up plants and dig roots. They used scraping tools to clean animal hides, which they used for clothing and shelter. By the end of the Paleolithic Age, people were making smaller and sharper tools. They crafted needles from animal bones to make nets and baskets and to sew hides together for clothing. This technology had a far-reaching effect. It drove the development of more advanced farming tools and influenced where people settled.
All right, let's go ahead and review what we read about in this section. Now, we talked about men being the primary hunters and women were the gatherers. Now, women also stayed near their camp, and the camps were usually set up near a body of water. Now, the body of water was used either for drinking, for fishing, for cleaning things. And everyone in the nomadic group would work together towards the entire group's survival. Later on, we can see that some groups broke off into a male and a female, a man and a woman and their children, and they would hunt and gather specifically for themselves. And that kind of developed into what we see as modern modern day families now. Now, some of the methods that the Paleolithic people used to hunt and gather their food were part of their culture and they were dependent on where they lived. So, certain tools were used to gather certain kinds of food, and they may not be the same ones you use across different areas. You wouldn't need fishing nets if you didn't live near a major body of water that had fish in it. You wouldn't need spears to hunt things like bison if there were no bison in that particular area. So the methods that they used were part of their culture, and it was dependent on where they lived and the food that they had available. Now, they also developed a lot of other tools to perform different tasks throughout time, and they figured out that they could use stones and tree branches. They figured out how to use flint to make sharp edged tools, cutting tools, to either skin animals, to clean animal hides, to cut up food into, smaller pieces. They used axes as part of their hunting for cutting down firewood. So all of these things were part of their culture, and it was the area that they lived in. It also talks about them making harpoons and fishing hooks, and that was specific to people who lived near large bodies of water.
Changing to survive. Climate affected how Paleolithic people lived. Some early people lived in cold climates and made clothing from animal skins to stay warm. They sought protection in available natural shelters, such as caves and rock overhangs. Remember, there were no houses or apartment buildings as we know them in the Paleolithic Age. Gradually, humans learned to make their own shelters. People constructed tents and huts of animal skins, brush, and wood. In very cold climates, some people made shelters from ice and snow. In regions where wood was scarce, Paleolithic people used the large bones from dead woolly mammoths or hairy elephant-like animals to build frames for shelters. They then covered the bones with animal hides. People living in warmer climates, on the other hand, needed little clothing or shelter. For the purposes of safety and comfort, however, many lived in caves and huts. These shelters provided protection against attacks by large animals. Fire sparks changes. Life became less difficult for Paleolithic people once they discovered how to make fire. People learned that fire provided warmth in cold caves. It provided light when it was dark and could be used to scare away wild animals. Armed with spears, hunters could also use fire to chase animals from bushes to be killed. Eventually, people gathered around fires to share stories and to cook. Cooked food, they discovered, tasted better and was easier to chew and digest. In addition, meat that was smoked by fire did not have to be eaten right away and could be stored. How did people learn to use fire? Archaeologists believe early humans produced fire by friction. They learned that by rubbing two pieces of wood together, the wood became heated and charred. When the wood became hot enough, it caught fire. Paleolithic people continued rubbing wood together, eventually developing drill-like wooden tools to start fires. They also discovered that a certain stone, iron pyrite, gave off sparks when struck against another rock. The sparks could then ignite dry grass or leaves, another way to start a fire.
Okay, let's go ahead and review what we read so far. So, the climate and the area that they lived in affected the type of housing that they lived in. Now, in order for them to build some kind of shelter, they had to use the resources found around them. So, some of them would move into caves and build within a cave, kind of set up their home over there. Some of them would build shelters using brush, wood, sticks, animal skins to protect them from the outside weather. And in regions where there wasn't very much wood, they could use bones from woolly mammoths. So if they hunted and killed these animals for food, they would use essentially all of the parts of this animal to help themselves survive. So They would eat the meat of the animal. They would use the hides or the skins for clothing or for coverings. And they would use the bones to help build the frames for their shelters. Now, once fire was introduced, this created a very big change in the lives of Paleolithic people. Not only did the fire keep them warm when it was cold outside, but it could be used as a weapon. They could use it against wild animals that tried to attack them, or they could use it to kind of scare and maneuver smaller animals out of their hiding spots so that they could hunt them. But it also allowed them to cook their food, which was easier for them to eat and digest, and allowed them to store food, which was something that they couldn't do before. Now there's theories on how they discovered fire and learned to use fire regarding, rubbing sticks together and that friction creating heat and using stones like iron pyrite. It gives off sparks, and those sparks will catch fire if you have some kind of dry grass or brush material nearby.
Language and art. Other advancements took place during the Paleolithic Age. One important advancement was the development of spoken language. Up until this time, early people communicated through sounds and physical gestures. Then they began to develop language. Ancient peoples started to express themselves in words for the same reasons we do. We use language to communicate information and emotions. Language makes it easier for us to work together and to pass on knowledge. We also use words to express our thoughts and feelings. The spoken language of early people was constantly growing and changing. New technology and more complicated experiences, for example, required new words. Early people also expressed themselves through art. Some of this art can still be seen today, even though it is thousands of years old. For example, in 1879, a young girl named Maria de Sautuola wandered into a cave on her grandfather's farm near Altamira, Spain. She was startled by what she discovered on the walls of that cave. Primary source. Maria entered the cave and suddenly reappeared, all excited, shouting, "Papa, mira, toros, pintados! Papa, look, painted bulls!" Maria had discovered one of the most famous animal art galleries in the world. From Hands, Prehistoric Visiting Cards by August Ganser. About 10,000 years before Maria's visit, Paleolithic artists had painted mysterious signs, including what looked like a herd of animals, horses, boars, bison, and deer, on the cave's ceiling. In 1940, a cave with similar paintings to those in Spain was discovered near Lascaux, in southern France. Paleolithic cave paintings have been found all around the world. Early artists crushed yellow, black, and red rocks and combined them with animal fat to make their paints. They used twigs and their fingertips to apply these paints to the rock walls. They later used brushes made from animal hair. Early people created scenes of lions, oxen, panthers, and other animals. Few humans, however, appear in these paintings. Historians are not sure why early artists chose to make cave paintings. Early people may have thought that painting an animal would bring hunters good luck. Some scholars believe, however, that the paintings may have been created to record the group's history. They may have been created simply to be enjoyed. Progress check. Explaining. Why was fire important for Paleolithic people?
Okay, let's go ahead and review this section and go over everything that we've learned so far. So one of the biggest advancements that was made was the development of spoken language. Now, as their tasks became more and more complex, and as the nomadic people and the people of the Paleolithic Age learned to do more and more things that are more and more complex, they needed to develop new words for those new tasks. So their language was constantly growing and changing to adapt to these new technologies that they came up with, new activities that they were doing, new ways that they were hunting or gathering. They created words to associate with those new things. Now, another thing that has been found are different forms of cave art, and there's two of them that you'll see over here on the right side of the screen. You'll see the hands painting, and you'll see the one of the animals. Now, these can still be found in caves across different areas. Paleolithic paintings during that time were made by taking colored rocks and crushing them up and combining them with animal fat so they could create these paints and the different colors that you see in them. So historians are not exactly sure why these paintings were made or why they didn't depict more humans, but one of the ideas is that it was meant to kind of document their history and the things that were important to them during their time period.
The Ice Ages. Guiding question. How did people adapt to survive during the Ice Ages? Tools and fire were two important technological developments of Paleolithic people. Throughout history, people have used new technology to help them survive when the environment changes. The Ice Ages were major environmental disturbances. The changes they brought about threatened the very survival of humans. What changes came with the Ice Ages? The Ice Ages were long periods of extreme cold that affected all of Earth. The most recent Ice Age began about 100,000 years ago. Thick sheets of ice moved across large parts of Europe, Asia, and North America. As the ice sheets, or glaciers, grew larger, the water level of the oceans was lowered. The low sea levels exposed a strip of dry land connecting the continents of Asia and North America. This strip of land was known as a land bridge. The land bridge acted as a natural highway that allowed people to travel from Asia into North America. From there, Paleolithic peoples moved southward to settle in different regions. How did the Ice Ages affect humans? Ice Age conditions posed a grave threat to human life. To survive in the cold temperatures, humans had to adapt or change many areas of their lives. One way they adapted their diets was by enriching meals with fat. To protect themselves from the harsh environment, they learned to build sturdier shelters. They also learned to make warm clothing using animal furs. Paleolithic people used fire to help them stay warm in this icy environment. The last Ice Age lasted about 90,000 years, ending between about 9,000 and 8,000 BC. Progress check. Explaining. How were land bridges formed?
All right, let's take a minute and watch our related video to this lesson.
Yosemite Valley, California. One of the most beautiful places in the world. And for many years, one of the most mysterious. When it was first discovered by explorers in the 1800s, they were baffled how such a place could have been created. Why was the valley floor so broad and flat? Its sides so steep? Why did a river end in a sudden drop, its water spilling hundreds of feet? What happened to the other half of Half Dome? For years, scientists wondered and argued.
An earthquake, of course. Only an earthquake would have the power to create such obvious dislocation and upheaval. No, it wasn't an earthquake at all. The valley was simply formed by stream erosion, just like any other valley in the world.
Then in the 1870s, naturalist and writer John Muir identified a force that was no longer visible in the valley, but which nonetheless left abundant evidence. Muir believed that Yosemite Valley was sculpted by giant glaciers more than a mile thick that advanced across North America and much of the world thousands of years ago. Muir imagined that Yosemite Valley may have looked like this in the distant past. Then, about 1 million years ago, the first ice sheets entered the valley. When the ice retreated, a totally new valley was revealed. Broader, deeper, dramatically carved.
They crushed and ground and wore away the rocks in their march. They carried away entire mountains, particle by particle, block by block. The great granite domes a mile high, the canyons as deep, the noble peaks, the broad valleys. These are glacier monuments.
For 6 years, John Muir hiked through Yosemite, compiling the evidence to support his argument. He found rock surfaces, smooth and shiny, polished by the movement of ice. He found giant boulders in places they should not be, carried there by glaciers. He found granite domes scarred by moving ice. And he found the very paths left by glaciers. And among the higher peaks nearby, he discovered small glaciers, tiny remnants of the massive ice flows that once scoured this land. What Muir found and wrote about helped support the theory that our planet has, in the past, been besieged by massive advances of ice during periods known as the Ice Ages. Today, almost 1/10 of the Earth's surface is permanently buried under ice. In the highest mountains, glaciers, great rivers of ice, remain frozen from year to year. Near the North and South Poles, vast ice sheets are thick enough to cover all but the tips of high mountain peaks. These great ice sheets, called Continental Glaciers, extend over hundreds of thousands of square miles of land. And ice covers much of the nearby seas. But today, sea ice is becoming thinner. And all over the world, most glaciers are becoming smaller. We know that present-day glaciers are only the remains of the much larger glaciers of the Ice Ages. About 1 million years ago, thick sheets of ice descended from the North Pole. The ice advanced and then retreated, to advance again a few thousand years later. At least 4 times the ice came down. And as recently as 10,000 years ago, continental glaciers over a mile high covered all of Canada and parts of the United States. There is little question the ice was here. But will it return again? To find out, let's explore some glaciers which exist today. This is the Blue Glacier in the northwestern United States, a rugged and frozen region. But even here, scientists have built research stations and set up instruments to study climate and the ice. They tell us that a glacier will form when winter snows fail to melt away during the summer. If part of one winter's snowfall remains on the ground until the next winter, layers of new snow are piled upon layers of older snow. During the summer, some snow melts and water trickles down through the layers. But if part of the snow remains, and snow piles up winter after winter, the lower layers will be frozen into solid ice. As this model shows, great quantities of dirt, sand, and rock covered by the snow are frozen into the ice. As more snow is piled on top, the glacier begins to move under its own tremendous weight. The movement of a real glacier is usually too slow to be seen. But a group of university students studying a glacier in the Swiss Alps found a way to photograph its movement. Into these holes they set posts. They placed a camera where they could photograph these posts from a fixed position every day for over a month. The pictures they took, projected together, show us how the glacier moved. Measurements showed it was moving about 10 inches a day. Some glaciers move slower, some much faster. Another way to observe glacial movement is to watch a glacier that ends at a river or an ocean. As the moving glacier pushes out into the water, pieces of its front edge break off. Dirt and sand that were frozen in the ice now muddy the water. And as the glacier continues to move, ice continues to break off. Every summer, some of the snow and ice on top of a glacier melts. If more melts than winter snows can replace, the glacier grows smaller. Now some of the dirt, sand, and rock which it carried and pushed along are left in jumbled piles at its front and sides. Great boulders that were carried in the ice are now exposed. They are called erratics. The hills of dirt, sand, and rock seen at the sides and front of a melting glacier are called moraines. They reveal the enormous power of a glacier's movement. Moraines and erratics are just part of the evidence a melting glacier leaves behind. Other evidence may often be seen on the rocks over which a glacier has passed. Sand and boulders frozen in moving ice can grind and polish rock, smoothing it until it shines like glass. Valleys through which glaciers have traveled are U-shaped, as opposed to V-shaped valleys which are caused by stream erosion. And when glaciers cut across river valleys, they leave waterfalls. In North America, a line stretching from the Pacific Ocean on the west through Midwest farmlands to New England on the east marks the southern limit of a great glacial advance. In New England woodlands, we find long, rounded hills in which sand, dirt, large boulders, and many smaller rocks are jumbled together. Hills that can only be moraines formed by glaciers. We also find giant erratic boulders that could have been carried here only by the power of a great glacier. In other places where the bedrock is exposed, we see evidence that tons of moving glacial ice have passed over, leaving the shiny glacial polish. If we examine this road cut, we recognize the jumbled mixture of dirt, sand, boulders, typical of a glacial moraine. Hills hundreds of feet high may prove to be glacial moraines, stretching for miles across the land. Even in the fields of the Midwest, farmers find rocks that were once part of a glacial moraine. Such rocks are often quite different from the bedrock under the soil. They may have been carried hundreds of miles from their source by the moving ice. So scientists know the ice was here. But what caused it to advance and retreat? And will it come again? We know that glaciers form and grow when winter snows fail to melt away during the summer. We know that if summer temperatures should drop only 4 or 5 degrees, unmelted snow would remain on the ground from winter to winter, and glaciers would grow. Perhaps during the ice ages, the Earth received a little less heat from the sun, and slightly cooler summers caused ice sheets to advance. Or heavier snows during many winters could have had the same results. So at research stations on the glaciers, scientists keep records of winter snowfall and study the weather which brings it. And they record the weather during the summer melt. Scientists also study the ice itself. They explore deep cracks called crevasses, observing the temperature and movement of ice below the surface. On the great continental glaciers near the North and South Poles, scientists measure the depth of the ice by drilling and setting off explosions. Instruments prove that in some places, the ice in these glaciers is over 2 miles thick. What the scientists have discovered is that today, most glaciers are melting back, leaving new moraines behind them, releasing tons of water that flow toward the sea. The Earth is presently warming, and more melting is expected in the next century. We now suspect that air pollution contributes to this warming trend. Smoke from the burning of fossil fuels surrounds our planet, helping to retain heat. Some scientists believe this pollution will cause more ice to melt, raising the level of our oceans and flooding some seaports within the next 100 years. But after that, most scientists foresee a return to the climatic conditions of past ice ages. This could happen within 10,000 years, but scientists aren't absolutely certain. In fact, that is one of the reasons they study glaciers, to find out if the ice will return. And places like Yosemite Valley may undergo yet another transformation.
All right, that takes us to the end of this particular video. Now we're going to go back and jump into the last little bit of our lesson here, we're going to go over the review questions. Now, these are the same review questions that you're going to find on page 61 in your book. These are the same ones that you will be answering using complete sentences and your best handwriting. So please do not answer these ones online in the online curriculum. This I want you to do on paper. Your first question is, what is another name for the Paleolithic Age? Number 2, describe by what method did Paleolithic people get food? Number 3, how did fire help Paleolithic people survive? Number 4, how did the ice ages affect where people settled in the Americas? Number 5, how does climate affect the type of house you live in or the clothes you wear? And number 6, you are a mother or father who lives in an early Paleolithic age. In a few paragraphs, describe your daily life. So these questions, you've got 6 questions here. The first 5 are 1 point each. The number 6 is going to be 5 points each for a total of 10 points. Please make sure you do your work carefully. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.